In the journey of nearly every major star from the world's top league, there comes a moment when a fan favorite falls, just when no one expects it. Sometimes, these defeats mark the end of a celebrated era. Other times, they're nothing more than a brief dip in an otherwise legendary career. In this video, we'll look at 10 moments when underdogs managed to bring down some of the biggest names in the game and shake up the spotlight in unforgettable fashion. 10th place, Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Vera. The first loss in O'Malley's career came as a complete shock to his fans. At that point, Sugar was cruising on a padded streak, taking out unknown names like Jose Canones and aging veterans like Eddie Wineland. He was building up a personal highlight reel filled with flashy knockouts, all while avoiding high-level competition. Yet, even after just 3 wins in the organization, he was already placed inside the top 15. The UFC brass clearly wanted to fast-track him to the top, and who could blame them? At just 26 years old, O'Malley had all the makings of a future star: charisma, a loud personality, wild looks, and an eye-catching fighting style. By the time UFC 252 rolled around, Sean had become one of the promotion's most marketable names. That night, they matched him up with Ecuadorian fighter Marlon Vera. For Chito, it was his 15th appearance in the organization. Vera had been on a run, finishing 5 opponents in a row before dropping a razor-thin decision to Song Yadong. He was the first serious test for O'Malley, someone in prime form with a real shot at derailing the hype train. Unfortunately, fans never got to see O'Malley truly open up. In the very first round, Vera's brutal calf kicks damaged Sean's leg to the point where he could barely stand on it. Marlon wasted no time. He dropped the wounded favorite to the canvas and finished him with ground and pound. The hype around Sugar was halted but not destroyed. O'Malley was quick to spin the narrative, claiming the Athletic Commission shouldn't count it as a real loss. From there, he steadily built a new win streak, one that would eventually lead him to the championship. And in the year 2024, Sean finally got his revenge. He dismantled Marlon Vera over 5 rounds in dominant fashion. These days, nobody even brings up that first loss anymore. 9th place, Stipe Miocic and Francis Ngannou. Throughout his time in the UFC, Francis Ngannou went through 2 major waves of hype. But even at the height of his fame, disappointment found its way into the story of the Cameroonian Predator. His first rise came when he stormed into the organization with flair. 6 straight knockouts propelled him toward a shot at the heavyweight title. During that run, Ngannou took out the promising wrestler Curtis Blades and 2 seasoned veterans, Andrei Arlovsky and Alistair Overeem. The latter was knocked out so violently by an uppercut that it looked like his head might separate from his shoulders. That moment cemented Francis as the most terrifying threat in the division. Fans rallied behind him in droves. By the time the title fight against Stipe Miocic was promoted, the champion himself felt slighted. Most of the marketing focused on Francis, not the reigning king. For Miocic, it was his 3rd title defense. He had already defeated legends like Fabricio Werdum, Alistair Overeem, and Junior Dos Santos. The firefighter from Ohio was on the verge of breaking the record for most consecutive title defenses in the heavyweight division. Yet he still entered the fight as the underdog. Many were convinced Francis would deliver another brutal knockout and claim the crown. But Stipe had other plans. He weathered the early storm, let the Cameroonian punch himself out, and then systematically broke him down. By the middle rounds, Ngannou was exhausted and could barely pose a threat. The experienced champion picked him apart, made him look lost in the cage, and walked away with a clear-cut, unanimous decision. That loss sent Ngannou's stock plummeting. When he followed it up with a lackluster bout against Derek Lewis, the hype around him all but vanished. Some even wrote him off completely, but Francis made a comeback. He put together another streak of knockouts, captured the title, avenged the loss to Miocic in the rematch, and eventually left the UFC as a reigning champion. 8th place, Amanda Nunes and Juliana Pena. Amanda Nunes' reign over the women's divisions was so dominant that by the time she stepped into the cage for yet another title defense, the world expected nothing but another one-sided beating. By the end of 2021, the Lioness was riding a streak of 12 consecutive victories, 9 of them coming in title fights. Along the way, she defeated Valentina Shevchenko twice, as well as Chris Cyborg, Holly Holm, Raquel Pennington, Ronda Rousey, and Miesha Tate. She was the first, and still only, woman to simultaneously hold 2 UFC belts, and she sat firmly atop the pound-for-pound rankings. Without a doubt, Amanda Nunes was the face of women's MMA. Her legacy loomed so large that no other champion has emerged in the bantamweight or featherweight divisions who hasn't been beaten by her. The matchup with Juliana Pena was expected to be nothing more than another routine entry in Nunes' record, but Pena had other plans. The Venezuelan underdog entered the fight as a massive long shot, with hardly anyone believing in her chances. After all, in her last 5 appearances, her record stood at 3 wins and 2 losses. She didn't stand out in any particular way when compared to Nunes's previous opponents. And yet, when she stepped into the octagon, she made history. Juliana dragged Amanda into a wild firefight, rocked her, and eventually submitted the champion, ripping the belt away and delivering the upset of the year. That defeat didn't erase Amanda's legacy, but it brought her crashing back down to earth. Just 6 months later, the Lioness returned with a dominant performance to reclaim her title. Not long after, she walked away from the sport on her own terms. 7th place, Luke Rockhold and Vitor Belfort. The merger between Strikeforce and the UFC brought many stars and champions into the world's Premier League, but few shone as brightly among the newcomers as Luke Rockhold. At 29 years old, the Californian had never been defeated in his professional career. He was a Strikeforce champion with 2 successful title defenses, boasting wins over Ronaldo Jacare Sousa and Tim Kennedy. Many saw him as a top contender for the UFC middleweight crown. His debut, however, came against a seasoned veteran, Vitor Belfort. The Brazilian was enjoying a second win in his career. He had already taken out Josh Barnett and Michael Bisping, and nearly submitted Ryan Johnson with a textbook armbar in between. The hype surrounding Rockhold was so intense that even against such a dangerous opponent, he entered the cage as the favorite. Fans expected the Californian to expose a relic of the past and step confidently into the title picture. But Belfort had other plans. Around the midway point of the opening round, he unleashed a spinning heel kick that crushed Rockhold's title dreams in an instant. Though he had just suffered the first loss of his career, Luke didn't stray from his path. 2.5 years later, he would eventually claim UFC gold, but that knockout forced him to take a step back and earn 4 consecutive finishes before being trusted with a title shot. The defeat didn't hurt his star power either. With each passing year, his popularity only grew. Thanks to his striking looks and charisma, Rockhold became one of the most recognizable fighters of his era. As for Belfort, that victory brought little lasting reward. He followed it up with another finish in his next fight, but then completely disappeared during the year 2014. When more rigorous drug testing was introduced in the UFC in 2015, things changed. Coincidence? Unlikely. The Brazilian would go on to lose 3 of his next 4 bouts and retired from MMA a few years later. 6th place, Israel Adesanya and Jan Błachowicz. For a long time, Israel Adesanya stood as an undefeated force atop the middleweight division. His rise began during his kickboxing days, but once he transitioned into MMA, his fame reached a new level. No longer just a star in Asia or Oceania, he became a household name in the United States as well. Adesanya climbed confidently to his title shot, delivering one of the division's all-time great fights against Kelvin Gastelum. Alongside Robert Whittaker, he broke UFC attendance records, and after claiming the belt, he defended it twice, first against Yoel Romero and then Paulo Costa. While his bout with the Cuban fighter drew some criticism, the win over Borrachinha was dazzling enough to solidify his spot as one of the best fighters in the promotion. He arrived at the perfect moment. Conor McGregor had taken a long break, John Jones had stepped away, and future stars like Sean O'Malley and Ilia Topuria hadn't yet emerged. In that window, Adesanya became the UFC's brightest name. He was the face of the league, with the biggest endorsement deals and some of the highest paydays. From that position, he decided to chase a second title. To join the exclusive club of double champions, the New Zealander had to get past Jan Błachowicz, a sturdy veteran who had picked up the light heavyweight belt after Jones vacated it. Jan had never been a superstar, and most believed Izzy would make it look easy. But the Polish fighter turned out to be far tougher than expected. He gave Adesanya problems on the feet and timed his takedowns perfectly. In the end, he handed the UFC's biggest star the first loss of his career. Israel took the defeat with grace. He returned to his original division and continued to reign, but the dream of holding 2 belts at once had to be left behind. 5th place, Cody Garbrandt and TJ Dillashaw. At the height of his rise, Cody Garbrandt became one of America's most beloved fighters. A straightforward kid from Ohio, he had all the makings of a future star. He had the looks for magazine covers, the presence to shine on the mic, and most importantly, he delivered electrifying performances in the cage. Cody made his UFC debut in January of 2015. By December of 2016, he was already wearing the championship belt. His meteoric rise was fueled by one thing: he knocked out everyone the matchmakers put in front of him. His sharp trash talk helped secure a title shot against then-champion Dominic Cruz. That night, Garbrandt dismantled the legend piece by piece, almost dancing through the octagon while doing it. At just 26 years old, Cody was crowned champion without a single loss on his record. It looked like the beginning of a long and prosperous career. Major endorsements, big sponsorship deals, and record-breaking paychecks seemed just around the corner. But reality had other plans. In his very first title defense, Cody faced his biggest rival, former teammate TJ Dillashaw. Their beef was personal. Dillashaw had left Team Alpha Male, the gym where their coach, Uriah Faber, had built him from the ground up. That betrayal turned TJ into a villain in the eyes of many. Cody entered the fight fired up, driven by loyalty and pride, hoping to defend both his belt and his mentor's honor. Instead, emotions got the better of him. He took a risk and paid dearly. In a single moment, Garbrandt lost the belt, his perfect record, and sadly, the durability of his chin. From that point on, his career spiraled into a string of knockout losses. The fearless no love was never quite the same again, and his star power? Fading ever since, with no sign of stopping. Fourth place, Sean O'Malley and Merab Dvalishvili. Here comes Sugar once again on this list. Can't be helped. We simply couldn't skip the story of how the Georgian icebreaker, Dvalishvili, gave Sean a reality check. UFC 206 at the Sphere became a legendary event in its own right. A mind-blowing futuristic arena, a stacked card, and in the main event, O'Malley versus Dvalishvili. By that point, Sean had become arguably the most popular active fighter in the organization. He headlined massive cards like UFC 299 and the historic night at the Sphere. The promotion handed him the biggest stages, and he always delivered. Fans adored Sean, and he rewarded them with highlight reel wins, especially that unforgettable knockout of Aljamain Sterling, which silenced even his loudest critics. But the fight with Merab Dvalishvili turned into a nightmare. For 25 relentless minutes, the Georgian takedown machine never stopped. He drowned O'Malley in grappling exchanges, completely neutralizing his striking. According to all three judges, Dvalishvili dominated every round except the last. Sean never got the chance to land a signature KO. Instead, he spent most of the fight trying to get back to his feet. It was a one-sided and unquestionable win for Merab, and naturally it affected Sean's popularity. He disappeared from the spotlight for about half a year and only recently returned, with a rematch now scheduled for June. In preparation, Sean made serious sacrifices, cutting out banned substances, video games, and even social media. He stepped away from the persona fans had grown attached to. Will it help in the rematch? We'll find out very soon. Third place, Brock Lesnar and Frank Mir. Brock Lesnar was another fighter who entered the UFC already carrying the weight of massive stardom in America. He had made a name for himself in professional wrestling and quickly became one of the most recognizable figures in WWE. With a strong background in amateur wrestling, Brock decided to step into MMA, a world where the hits were very real. After winning his only professional fight in K1 with a first-round finish, he signed with the UFC immediately, becoming the most high-profile newcomer of 2008. Waiting to welcome him was Frank Mir, a former champion who had lost his belt after being sidelined for 2 years due to a serious motorcycle accident. Though he eventually returned to competition, Mir wasn't in peak form and had been trading wins and losses. He seemed like a suitable matchup for Lesnar, experienced enough to give the fight credibility, but vulnerable enough that a win would catapult Brock toward title contention. Unfortunately for the wrestling superstar, even a battle-worn Frank Mir had the technical edge to catch the juggernaut. Just 1 minute and 30 seconds into the opening round, Mir locked in a knee bar submission and handed Lesnar the first loss of his MMA career, cooling the hype around him in an instant. But that loss didn't derail Brock's trajectory. He made adjustments, and by the end of that same year, 2008, he was already fighting for the title. He defeated Randy Couture and was crowned the new UFC heavyweight champion. 6 months later, Mir and Lesnar met again, this time with Brock defending his belt. In the rematch, Lesnar dominated and finished Frank in the second round, avenging the only defeat of his career. He would go on to remain the UFC's biggest draw until the arrival of Conor McGregor. For several years, he topped pay-per-view sales, turning both himself and the organization into financial juggernauts. Second place, Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz. The Irishman is such a towering figure in the sport that there's hardly anyone who hasn't heard of him. Most still remember who Conor was at the height of his powers. He wasn't just the most recognizable name in the UFC, he became the face of the entire sport, pushing MMA into a new era of global popularity. By the year 2016, McGregor was at the absolute peak of his career. He had already dismantled Jose Aldo, claimed the featherweight title, captured the hearts of millions around the world, and set his sights on a second belt. Originally, he was scheduled to face Rafael dos Anjos for the lightweight crown, but the Brazilian pulled out with an injury at the last moment. In stepped Nate Diaz. At the time, the Stockton native wasn't nearly as famous as he is today. For much of his career, Nate had fought in the shadow of his older brother, competing for modest paychecks and holding a spot firmly in the middle tier of the roster. The only real breakout moment he'd had was a thrilling win over Michael Johnson, followed by a fiery post-fight interview that gave birth to the iconic line, "Conor, you stole everything I worked for." Fate had its say, and Nate Diaz became McGregor's next opponent. Conor, who had been steamrolling everyone in his path, entered the fight as a massive favorite, even though it was set at welterweight, a weight class he had never fought in before. Fans expected another knockout from the Notorious, but instead witnessed his first UFC loss by the end of round 2. McGregor gassed out, lunged in desperation for a takedown, and was soon choked from the back. That defeat, however, barely put a dent in his momentum. Fans were quick to defend him. Short notice, late opponent switch, unfamiliar weight class. The excuses were ready and the hype barely wavered. And just 6 months later, McGregor came back and earned a convincing revenge win. But that fight did something else entirely. It launched Nate Diaz into the spotlight. Overnight, he became one of the most popular names in the UFC. He stepped out from his brother's shadow, started earning multi-million-dollar paydays, and began handpicking blockbuster fights of his own. First place, Alex Pereira and Magomed Ankalaev, bursting into the UFC as Israel Adesanya's biggest threat. Alex Pereira quickly rose to stardom and championship glory. He was the first fighter to defeat and finish Israel Adesanya in the middleweight division. After losing the rematch, he moved up to light heavyweight, where he once again captured gold. His signature war cry, Shama, the iconic bow and arrow celebration, and his quirky social media clips helped Pereira rapidly build a dedicated fan base. His frequent and explosive performances made him one of the most talked about names in the sport. He stepped in on short notice more than once, saved entire cards, and delivered brutal, highlight reel knockouts, earning the love of fans around the world. After 3 dominant title defenses, it seemed like Pereira had truly found his place at the top. He had taken out nearly everyone in the top 5 except for one name, Magomed Ankalaev. The Dagestani was the final hurdle standing between Pereira and a claim to being the best light heavyweight since John Jones. In March of 2025, Ankalaev finally got his long-awaited shot, and this time, he did not let it slip away. He never allowed Pereira to settle into his rhythm, applied suffocating pressure, and earned a clear-cut decision victory. Since that night, the echoes of Shama across social media have noticeably faded. Now, Pereira faces a rematch. But if he fails to reclaim the belt, his popularity will almost certainly begin to decline. And considering that the Brazilian is already 37, he may never again ride the wave of hype that Magomed Ankalaev managed to break. Dear viewers, which one of these matchups caught you by surprise the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We appreciate it in advance. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button, ring the bell, and subscribe to our channel. See you soon.